Hello everyone, my name is Stanley St. Bros, and today we're going to be talking about personal narrative written by Jonathan Edwards. Now, before I go into summary analysis of this work, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. Now, in this work by Jonathan Edwards, we're talking about a lot of things. We can take this narrative, this personal narrative, from Jonathan Edwards as a autobiography. In this work, we're talking about things that happened in his life. We're talking about his religious principles, his religious views, the way in which he viewed society, American society during his lifetime. We're talking about his devotion to God. We're talking about what he considers to be a true Christian. This work is jam packed. It's not something that you speed read. It's not something that you read in one sitting because every paragraph, every sentence is loaded with information about his views and the world that he lived in and how he viewed God. Personally, I think that Jonathan Edwards puts every Christian to shame. I think the only people that really rival the work of Jonathan Edwards or Jonathan Edwards' devotion and intensity towards God are I would say pastors or maybe even prophets, because Jonathan Edwards is a philosopher. He comes up with his own views on Christianity, and he builds upon his views based on principles that are established in the Bible. His life is just a Bible story, just the things that he went through. This is the guy that his church pretty much deposed him. His church pretty much made him stop preaching because his sermons were so intense. His approach to Christianity was just so intense that it wasn't matched. So while you're reading this personal narrative by Jonathan Edwards, you're getting a lot about his life, his personal life. I'm just going to tell you guys this just for general information. We know that Jonathan Edwards was born in Connecticut. That's the state I'm in right now. He was born in Connecticut, and it's kind of fascinating he's not like the place where he was born and the place that he was raised. I'm not really that far away from it, from my location, which is very fascinating. So this is a guy that he was born in a time where he saw that the Puritans had the right idea about religion, had the right idea about Christianity. And that's saying a lot because keep in mind, the Puritans were burning people for being witches. The Puritans, they did not play. Like today, I would say that the Christianity that we have in the 21st century, it's the cookie cutter version of Christianity where you get a lot of mega churches that are talking about, prosperity and being good and going to church once a week or on special occasions. During the age of Puritans, during Jonathan Edwards' lifetime, these are individuals who were devoted to God. These are individuals who would pray 6-7 times a day, literally go to church nonstop. Going to church wasn't just a chore that you did once a week. Going to church was a full-time job. Participating in church was a full-time job. And in some communities, especially in the Puritan community, if you didn't go to church, if you didn't show your religion, if you didn't wear your religion on your sleeve or on your chest, you could be considered to be a witch or a non-believer. There was no place for atheists. There was no place for non-believers. There was no place for non-Christians within the era that Jonathan Edwards lived in, the era of the Puritans. Because in this personal narrative, Jonathan Edwards kind of tell his people that we need to hold on to the time of old. We need to hold on to the Christianity that we came to America with, because that's the non-cookie cutter version of Christianity. So there's a lot in here. This personal narrative kind of begins with Jonathan Edwards explaining his childhood and what he went through as a child. And it's very intense. Like for on my own personal views. Like I'm a Christian, I pray, but the way that Jonathan Edwards goes about praying when he was just a kid, when he was just a child, uh, it doesn't, like, my version of praying doesn't even come close to what he's doing. This is a guy who had special places in nature, in the woods, at his house. This is a guy, he tells us within his own personal narrative that sometimes he would shut himself in his house and cry for hours on end about his sins. I mean, most of us today in the 21st century, we'll pray for our sins, we'll ask God for redemption and forgiveness, but Jonathan Edwards is shutting himself up in his house and he's crying for 2 3 hours, crying, not praying, crying to God and lamenting to God about his sins and how horrible he is. This personal narrative, Jonathan Edwards reflects on himself. He reflects on his faith. He reflects on his behavior. He questions, his pride. He questions his emotions, his feelings. It is overwhelming. It is this personal narrative, and in many parts, it's overwhelming because if you think that you're a Christian, if you compare yourself to Jonathan Edwards, if you compare your faith to Jonathan Edwards, it's just, you're not getting close because as a child, as a 12, 13-year-old boy, Jonathan Edwards was literally already an Ivy League student. Like before he wasn't even in his 20s. He was already studying at Yale. He even became the president of Princeton. This is a man who studied for 13 hours a day. And when I say studying, he's studying religious studies. He's in religious studies. He's studying the works of philosophers. He's studying the works of other writers, of preachers. And his life is just a Bible story. So in this personal narrative, again, we start at the beginning of his life. He tells us that as a child, that he's studying a lot, that he's praying at least 5 times a day. Sometimes him and his friends, this is like a 13, 14-year-old boy meeting up with his friends, not to like play in the woods or, whatever 13-year-old boys do, not to hang out or anything like that. This is Jonathan Edwards at the age of 13 and 14. He's meeting up with his friends to pray. I mean, you don't hear that happening in the 21st century. These are young teenagers meeting up to pray, to pray to God together and to lament in front of God. So that's the type of friends he had. At a young age, he's studying at Yale. He's studying in school. He for 13 hours a day. Just think about that. There's only 24 hours a day, and this guy is studying for 13 hours a day. By the time he gets to his 20s, he is a full, relentless, intense Christian. This is not a cookie cutter Christian. This is an intense man. He reserves parts of the day in the morning and the afternoon, different times in the day where he goes out in the woods, in the wilderness, wherever he can to get a good walk in and reflect on God's world and reflect on God's majesty. He sees, a lot of people look at the world and see God's greatness and God's intelligence and God's majesty. And Jonathan Edwards, he does this a lot throughout his life, where he goes out, looks at the clouds, looks at the sun, looks at the trees, woods, waters, whatever he can find in the natural world, and he sees God's greatness. He sees God's wonder. He sees God's awe. And it's very significant because he even tells us at one point he didn't like thunderstorms, he didn't like storms and lightning and all that kind of stuff, but because of his closeness with God, because of his religious perspective, he starts to just see the wonder of God in storms, and that is something that's quite significant. When there's a snowstorm, a thunderstorm, any type of storm, or a hurricane or whatever, you can always witness how small you are in the grand scheme of things. You can always witness how insignificant you are at times, because a thunderstorm can scare people. It's loud. It's powerful. There's a type of um, there's a type of power behind natural events that make us feel powerless, and that alone can make you think about God. That alone can make you think about the greatness of God. And Jonathan Edwards, he thanks God for all of that. He thanks God for everything. He tells us that he goes in within this personal narrative. He even tells us that the true form of a Christian is like a white rose. Picture this. Picture a field where there's a bunch of roses, and all these roses, there's thousands and millions and billions of roses. And let's say for a second that these are the Christian souls, right? The roses are Christian souls. They're all white, and the sun is just above, and the sun's rays are hitting all of the roses, and it's bright and it's beautiful. There's grass everywhere. It's lush. And Jonathan Edwards says, the roses, are in all of their majesty and all of their glory. They're like just basking in the sun, and they're unfolding themselves in the sun and just rejoicing in the sun's majesty. And when you think about the sun in the natural world in that sense, the Christian life or the Christian soul is supposed to have humility. It's if you're a Christian, if you're following God, if you're saved, if you're redeemed, you're supposed to bow down in front of God. And Jonathan Edwards, that's what he seeks. He seeks to bow down in front of Jesus Christ, bow down in front of God, bow down in front of God's majesty. And you can see the depiction and the imagery that he uses within this personal narrative to depict how he loved God and how he absolutely positively gave himself to God. This is a man who preached at churches. This is a man who wanted to be conservative in the church. I mean, if Jonathan Edwards was alive in 2020 today, he would be appalled by the state of churches today, because the level of intensity that this man had for God, I don't think it's depicted in religion today. Because this man, he wrote a sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. If you want to know more about that sermon, I have a video on that, so be sure to check it out if you want to know more about that. But in this sermon, I'll just give you a short version of it. He talks about hell, and when I read this sermon, I mean, I was terrified. Let's be honest here. I was terrified. The imagery that this guy used to talk about hell and corruption and sin. I mean, he has you shaking in your boots. I was terrified just reading about this sermon or reading this sermon. Imagine when he was preaching it. Imagine when he was giving this sermon, the level of intensity, the level of seriousness. If you've ever seen a pastor preach or a reverend preach with the level of seriousness, the level of conviction, the level of truth in their voice and their movements and their actions, because certain pastors, certain deacons, certain people who preach, they preach with emotion, with power, with gusto, with energy, and they truly and utter believe in what they're preaching. And Jonathan Edwards, he is not, just at a 9 to 5. He's not just working. He's not just preaching at the church. He lives and explores and gives himself fully and completely. Just like that white rose I was talking about, he really lowers himself and opens himself all to God. Just like a sun basking in the sun, a flower basking in the sun's ray. So that sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an God, very significant, says a lot about Jonathan Edwards, and it also says about the intensity that Jonathan Edwards has. And throughout this personal narrative, he even goes on to just talk about the different people he meet, his life experiences with God, and how, at the beginning of his life, it was mostly emotional, his connection with God, but later he understands, he understands scripture, he understands the writing, he understands the Bible, he understands the philosophy behind worshiping God and being a good Christian. And not only that, he experiences it in his life. This is a guy who sits in nature for hours on end and sings about the wonder of God, and sings to himself, and commune with God, and literally give all of himself to God. And I would say that it's kind of like how David is in the Bible, the way that the Bible tells us that, you know, David's heart was for God, right? The same way I feel like Jonathan Edwards was trying to do the same thing and just give him his entire mind, body, and soul to God, and just fully in everything that he did, he worshiped God. So that's the personal narrative. That's like the what goes on throughout the whole thing. He's telling us to be true Christians. He's asking us to keep that fire. He's asking us to keep that passion. He's asking us to worship God in every sense of the word, while you're walking, while you're learning, like every sense of the word. Now, Jonathan Edwards, he is just when you put apart the education. After you look at the education, you look at his intensity, you look at his passion. His life was just a very interesting life. I mean, he had over 10 kids. He went throughout Connecticut. He preached. There was some controversy with him in his church because the individuals that he preached to, you know, he was taken down as a preacher because he was just so intense. He was just too intense. Because again, going back to Sinners in the Hands of Reneging God, this is a man who made people come to tears. This is a man who made people shake in their boots. This is a man, like, when he's giving a sermon, he is not just, you know, in this monotone. You know, he's really getting into it, and he can get under your skin, because his sermons, if you read his sermons, they're not just him trying to convert you to Christianity. He is trying to set a spark, that fire inside of you, and really make you think about serving God and what being a true Christian really means. And most people, I mean, some sermons, they will, you know, go towards your conscience, you know, make you think, get underneath your skin, and some people felt uncomfortable. Some people felt destroyed, and they wanted to be better. And a lot of them converted, and some converted and really went after that passion that Jonathan Edwards was talking about. But, you know, at the end, he was taken down because it was just too much. I don't, you know, in my own personal view, I don't fault Jonathan Edwards for that. I think that passion, that level of devotion is what the Bible asks for. And I don't think he was in the wrong, but most people are more comfortable with going to church or worshiping God on their own terms, or, like, you know, praying for 2 minutes and, you know, going to church twice a year. So we don't have that same passion. I don't think society in general has that same passion. And Jonathan Edwards, in this personal narrative, he says that's a problem because, you know, that's just not the right way to worship God. In terms of analysis, in terms of deeper meaning here, you know, we have to look. This is not just a work. It's not just a sermon. It's not just autobiography on Jonathan Edwards' life. It's also a work of philosophy, because to Jonathan Edwards, let's just think about this for a second. The world has over 2 billion Christians, right? For a lot of Christians, the stories in the, you know, for it's supposed to be all Christians, right? For Christians, even myself as a Christian, you know, we believe that there is a God. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in the Holy Trinity, right? We believe in angels, and because that's all in the Bible and what the Bible speaks about. We believe in a heaven and a hell. We believe in God and all that shows up in the Bible. So for Jonathan Edwards, this is not a joke. This is the way he views reality, right? He views reality. He believes in God, and everything that he goes through, he believes in them. So one way that philosophy works is you're studying reality, you're studying reason, you're studying your existence, right? That's one purpose of philosophy. For Jonathan Edwards, he is studying the world around him, the natural world. He's studying the natural world. He's studying his reality, and he is trying to connect to the reality of God and what that means for him as a Christian. So this intensity, this passion, it's all real for him. This is a man who gave his entire physical being to God, and he was not just doing this just because. He truly and honestly believed in it, and that same fire, that same passion is the same passion you see in the Bible, the same passion that you see in true believers and believers without any doubt. So, Jonathan Edwards asks us to take away that doubt and to really throw ourselves into God without looking back. And for most people, that's a hard thing to do. Not most people can do that. And so looking at, Christianity through the eyes of Jonathan Edwards is very significant, and it shows you how you can improve your own faith and how you can explore who God is. Because this man, again, he's intense. He is praying more than 5 times a day. He is studying. He's not only studying the works of Christians and the Bible. He's studying the works of philosophers. And he is a brilliant man. This is a man who studied at Yale, who was the president of Princeton, and he lived his life fully and utterly for God. So that's very significant. And the way that he views reality, and he even goes into our consciousness. He talks about reason. He talks about our reality, and what we need to do to be true souls that live and exist for God. And that's very significant. That just says a lot about our world and the world that Jonathan Edwards saw, because he didn't see the world as just we live in a world. He saw the world through a Christian point of view, through worshiping God, because everything, thunderstorms, natural events, non-natural events, living near people, commuting with people, having relationships with people. He viewed all of that through a Christian perspective. Most people today, as soon as you step out of your church, as soon as you're not doing something in the church, you're very secular. You do what is normal in society. You're not trying to see the world from a Christian perspective. You only do that when you're in church. But for Jonathan Edwards, 24/7, his entire life was about God. So yeah, that's the personal narrative. It's about autobiography. It says a lot about Jonathan Edwards. And the last thing I'll say is just, it's kind of sad how he dies. Because, this is a man that he didn't live to like his 80s or 90s. He died in his 50s. And I believe it was because of smallpox. I think he got the smallpox vaccination. And that was supposed to help him, but it ended up killing him. So I'm just gonna add that in because this is his personal narrative is in of a way his autobiography. So I've told you all about how his early life, what he did during his life, and he had a lot of kids, and pretty much that's how he died. So that is Jonathan Edwards. If you're a Christian watching this, be a better Christian. I mean, I've learned a lot from him just by reading his works. This guy, Jonathan Edwards can be terrifying. He can be terrifying because his intensity, I don't think anybody can match his intensity today. So that's very significant. So anyway, guys, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in my next video.